Here to take a look both politically and from a public policy perspective, James Carafano, Vice President for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. James, it is so good to have you here this morning from Washington, D.C.
Great to be with you.
James, have we reached the tipping point now, a sea change in terms of the public's perception of illegal immigration, especially when it comes to the latest influx from Central America?
No, we're not done yet. Look, Americans are basically a very practical people. When things work, they say, okay. And when things are obviously not working, they throw up their hands and they go, we don't like this. That's who we are. We've been that way since the American Revolution. So it's widely reported that President Obama is considering doing an expanded administrative amnesty during the summer break in August. That's going to create an absolute firestorm. I mean, that literally take the number that's in this group of people that they've been detaining at the border that they're going to bring in the United States and multiply that by a big number. I mean, we're talking about adding 5 or 6 million people to the president's administrative amnesty. That is going to create an absolute firestorm walking right into the midterm elections, and it's not going to play well. It's not going to tip the balance, except it's really going to polarize this country, and it's going to make the potential for actually doing the practical, reasonable things that Americans want virtually impossible.
Now, the temptation for President Obama will be, of course, what we've seen throughout his time in the White House: blame his predecessor, blame George W. Bush. Certainly, I had my disagreements with President Bush, who, of course, advocated, quote, comprehensive immigration reform. In this case, does President Obama, and on record, I don't think any of us want to see him issue an executive amnesty, but will he have an element of truth employing the rhetorical defense that, hey, my predecessor did it, or my predecessors took a more charitable view of the border, just like I'm doing?
Yeah, and the answer is no. So just very quickly, the way this works is, as we both remember, in 2006, 2007, President Obama wanted to consider, President Bush wanted to consider a solution that was very similar to what President Obama has composed, which is, let's give everybody amnesty and let's add border security, let's do internal enforcement. That bill crashed and burned, and it wasn't just Republicans. It was a bipartisan rejection of that bill. And as a matter of fact, Americans weren't even in favor of that, so it failed. But when President Bush did, really beginning in 2007, and actually before that, is they went ahead and they got a lot more serious about internal enforcement. They added a lot of security to the border. They started building a fence. And because of that, and also because we had a recession, the number of people unlawfully in the United States began to decline, which was unprecedented because it had been an unprecedented growth since the 80s. And it started to go down, and it kept going down, and it kept going down until when? Until 2012. In 2012, President Obama announced an administrative amnesty called DACA for alien minors inside the United States. And then those numbers started to move up. And then the coyotes, the guys that do the human smuggling, they use that as an advertising campaign. And combined with the situation in Latin America, those numbers have started to skyrocket. So very clearly, the current wave of illegal border crossing that we're seeing, this is clearly on the feet of President Obama. Now, some people go back and mention a 2008 law called the Wilberforce Law. Wilberforce was the British politician who helped ban slavery worldwide. It was a bill very narrowly designed to deal with human trafficking issues. It has some provisions in there that do with the expedited removal of minor aliens, but quite honestly, it doesn't prevent President Obama from deporting people, and there are provisions that waive that. So it's a flawed law. It should be modified. But pointing to that law or somehow blaming President Bush for this is just ridiculous. This is a post-2012 problem that's been created by this president and his foreign policies, his border policies, and his immigration policies.
Well, as you have a very important position in terms of national security, What I've always said is border security is national security, and we still fail to adequately deal with that. While we've been concentrating on the Central American children, ranchers along the border continue to find prayer rugs and other articles indicating that people are coming not only from Mexico and Central America, but from the Middle East and other nations. So this is an ongoing problem.
Well, what really scares the hell out of me are these transnational gangs and the transnational criminal cartels that smuggle money, people, guns and drugs. This is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. It has destabilized countries throughout Latin America. They have networks that run all the way from deep in Latin America up through Canada. They work with people like Hamas and Hezbollah. They have networks that run through Africa and Central Europe. These cartels, these criminal cartels, they are a threat to the security of the United States. And President Obama's policies, which encourage illegal migration, which encourage the border being a less secure and stable place, that creates a breeding ground for these guys to operate. So he is creating one of the greatest national security threats that we've seen in the 21st century. And on top of that, he has absolutely been gutting the U.S. military. And part of the thing that we don't talk about that's a big consequence of that is we are doing almost no drug interdiction in Latin America.
And we're going to have to follow up with you on that, James Carafano, during your next visit. We'll leave it right there today. James Carafano, Vice President for National Security and Foreign Policy from the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for your comments. Now, where do you stand on this? Why don't you tweet us your remarks at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum.